Better me.
Better me.
Better me.
Better me.
It's better me. Hopefully.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. I am so thirsty for people to listen to it. And my boss shows me bar graphs. This is Better Me, hopefully. And it's a podcast about discovering what is actually good for us in the health world and what's just an absolute waste of our time and money. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about alcohol. Now, I don't want you to sit there and think, oh, great, a preachy podcast about how I shouldn't drink alcohol, because that's not what this is. I am just one of those people that, as much as I love alcohol and I find it really, really fun, I'm just not very good at it, and I just have too many shots and then have hangover anxiety. So I wanted to talk to Vic and Hamish from the podcast Sober Awkward on how the hell you do it. How can you live a sober, curious life and not be a boring human?
One of the most surprising aspects that I found of going sober was the amount of time that you get back, particularly when you're on a holiday. That's when I realised, oh my God, I spend a lot of time doing this exercise.
Vic and Hamish are amazing when it comes to like a social point of view or an experience point of view, but I also wanted to catch up with an expert. So I got in touch with Associate Professor of Mental Health and Addiction, Andy Towers, and I asked him all of the health questions.
I drink alcohol. I don't drink a lot.
I so wanted to ask you that.
I'm not a prohibitionist. I don't think we should have prohibition for most drugs, because prohibition doesn't work. What we need is actually a better understanding of what drugs do and how to manage those drugs and the outcomes.
Better me, hopefully, with Sharon Casey.
I actually wanted to do this episode down the track because I didn't feel like I was ready to talk about it. Because I've been living a sober, curious life now for most of this year and part of last year as well. I don't know, I felt like it was going to be too raw of a thing to just like jump into on a podcast and tell everyone about. But I guess that's why we're here, so we may as well just rip off the Band-Aid. I've done a lot of therapy on having hangxiety. Hangxiety is like that feeling when you wake up the next morning and even though you didn't do anything stupid from drinking, it's just like a paralyzing anxiety. And when I would get hangxiety, like it became comical that I would text my friends and be like, I'm so sorry if I was annoying last night. Or, I'm so sorry if I did this last night. Then the anxiety would get to a physical sense where I just had to physically get it out of my body. And that would mean that I would just be vomiting, just trying to get the anxiety and the alcohol out of my body. I'm not an alcoholic. It just doesn't serve me in an amazing way. One thing I've learned about my anxiety is that a big part for me is bad things happen when you drink. And that's because when I was younger, a member of my family, I found them when they had an accident. I put them in the recovery position. I called the ambulance. I watched another member of my family pull God knows what out of their throat. And they weren't even a big drinker. I had to see them on life support for 36 hours. And they almost died. That's always caused me like massive anxiety. And then, and then when I first started working in radio, you would always have those people around you that on a Monday would, even though you didn't do anything, you're just being harmless and being 20, would stand in front of the office and be like, what about when you did this? And what about when you did that? And oh my God, you must have been hungover on Sunday. And so you're like, you knew you were going to get bullied when you went to work. That's just like stuck with me forever. So now I only drink if I'm on holiday and I'm with my husband, who is like my safe person. I didn't drink for about, I think it was 97 days. Then I went on holiday and I had a couple of drinks. It was totally fine. And New Year's Eve, had a great time. But then same thing, I just didn't listen to Bryce and I was being annoying and woke up the next morning feeling really hungover and I was like, I thought that I had figured out how to have a handbrake and I hadn't figured out how to have a handbrake. And so what I did was I went and downloaded the app I Am Sober because I'm a really competitive person, and to have an app that every day holds me accountable to not drinking and has a counter to tell me how many days it's been since I've had a drink was really helpful to me because I was like, shit, yeah, girl, you've done a month. Oh, yeah, you've done 50 days or whatever. I went on to like Apple Podcasts and I searched sober podcasts. And the first podcast that came up was a podcast called Sober Awkward. And I started listening to it. They had done a New Year's Day episode and everything that Vic and Hamish were saying about not drinking alcohol and being sober curious just absolutely spoke to me. So it's really exciting for me that the first episode on Better Me, hopefully, is Vic and Hamish from Sober Awkward.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is quite amazing because I know that people tell you guys all the time what a huge effect that you've had on their lives when it comes to going sober, because it can be a really confronting, well, not can be, it is a really confronting kind of daily journey. Like, can you guys share how you guys got to this point in your life that you decided that alcohol was just no more your best friend?
So I have always been a massive binge drinker for 25 years from a family that were all big boozers. I saw drinking as something that I had to do. I never ever questioned it. It was like I needed to join in with my family. And it just became something that was so natural to me. I never looked outside of drinking, not until after I had children and I started to get huge anxiety every time I drank. And I had to question my drinking for the first time. It was a consequence, you know, me holding a crying baby in my arms and not feeling capable of looking after him. So I got therapy for 12 weeks. I unravelled the reasons why I drank and I decided to quit forever.
It's interesting because, Vic, in your book, 1,000 Wasted Sundays, which was like such a great title, by the way.
Thank you.
You're talking about when you found out that you were pregnant and you were like, but can I drink wine when I'm pregnant?
Yeah.
Like, even at that point where you're like, oh my God, like someone just tell me I can have a glass of wine. Is it crazy to you to think that that's how you were with alcohol when you've been sober for so long now?
I was literally going to cancel my wedding. I found out I was pregnant 3 months before my wedding, and the first thing I said was, we've got to cancel the wedding.
Yes.
I can't not drink at my wedding. I thought it's absolutely an outrageous thought. So yeah, I cannot believe that this person existed inside that person. It's a completely different identity that I have now.
Hamish, what was it for you? Like, that's Vic's story of how she ended up here with you doing Sober Awkward. How did it all begin for you?
My story is a bit less dramatic. We actually joked earlier that if you tell someone to get sober, they never get sober. It's usually their own decision. And lots of partners try and convince their partners to give up. Except for me. Vic was like, hey, you need to go sober. And I was like, okay. So I was never had a problem with drinking. I was like probably the biggest lightweight in my group of friends. I'm not the heaviest drinker by any stretch. But I'd just become a dad. And Vic had me doing the podcast with a previous host called Lucy. Lucy stopped doing it, and Vic said, hey, do you want to come for a walk with me? And I was already a fan of the podcast. I was like, going on a walk. I felt like I was a teenager getting broken up with by my girlfriend. Like, should we meet for a walk? I was like, what's she going to say? And she basically said,
Let's be friends.
She said, Lucy doesn't want to do it anymore. You got to go sober and be the host. And I was like, all right. And I went sober that day. Wow. And it was kind of good timing because I remember growing up, I always wanted to be a professional sportsman. I want to be a footballer. I was like, I'm going to be a footballer. And if I'm a footballer, I'm going to be the model professional and I'm going to be the first to training. I'm going to be the last to leave. I'll be sober. I'll eat all the right things. And I'm not very good at football. So I didn't make it as a footballer. And then I feel like whatever career you go into, which isn't this dream thing as a child, you don't set the same expectations for yourself. So in all of my career, I've not been the first to arrive or the last to leave, and I haven't been drinking and eating right until I became a parent. And I was like, parenting, I want to have high expectations of myself and I want to be elite at it. And if going sober makes me like 1% better as a parent, which I thought would then make me a better husband, I can commit to that. So she asked me at just the right time. I'd also just had a hangover with a newborn, which I don't want to do again.
No, it's like brutal. That's so brutal.
Yeah.
What would you say, like, for people, they're sober curious, they want to get sober? I think everybody thinks that if you're going sober, that means that you're an alcoholic. Like, I know that I felt that. It's like, I'm not an alcoholic. It's just not really serving me.
Yeah.
In that way, and that's why I don't want to do it. I don't want to have anxiety and then my kids see that and things like that. But what for you has been the benefits?
Well, I think getting rid of that stigma, first of all, of you having to be an extreme drinker to be deserving of help or even deserving of healing in some way. Because that's what sobriety is. It doesn't end up being about the booze. It ends up about being this whole journey into learning about who you are and why you are the way you are. So that's a really interesting aspect, is because on Sober Awkward, we tend to not talk about extreme alcoholism and people like, the sort of people that are on a park bench with a bottle of Jack Daniels clutched to their chest. It's a very different story, that. And where we base the podcast is anyone that's ever had a hangover. This place between the pub and an AA meeting where people sort of fall through the cracks because they don't get therapy and don't get some support. So it's really interesting that there's this stigma around alcoholism, whereas in fact, as a country, especially in Australia where we live, everybody has some sort of weird intricate relationship with booze, whether they're having it doesn't have to be necessarily one glass of wine a day. It could be a beer at the weekend, and sometimes we want to do it, but we do, and we're sort of on this kind of constant battle with alcohol just because it's so socially acceptable. It's just because we always do it. So it's really interesting to try and talk about that space, this grey area drinking, where so many of us fit in.
I quite now enjoy, you say, I'm sober, and then you watch people run through this role play of like, oh God, they're sober, I shouldn't have asked. Does that mean they used to be an alcoholic? How bad did it get? And I quite like just leaving that hanging. Yeah. I don't say anything more than I'm sober, and I just see their brain work. But I think the most rewarding part of going sober for me is that you quickly realise that actually going sober, bizarrely, isn't really about giving up drinking. By that I mean not drinking alcohol is the least interesting thing that happens to you when you go sober. The most interesting thing is that you have to address why you drank in the first place. Yeah. And you have to ask yourself, can I still be an extrovert? Can I still go mad on the dance floor? Can I still enter a social situation? Can I do all of these challenging things that I only ever used to do drunk?
Yeah. Man, Hamish is just so right on this one, but how did we get here in the first place? I asked expert Andy Towers.
One of the reasons we have such a serious drinking culture is because we imported it from the UK. For a long time, in the first half of the century, we had what was called 6 o'clock closing, and that was meant to reduce the amount of alcohol you could drink. But what it meant for a long time was that once they got off work, they went straight to the bar, drank as much as they could, and got absolutely hammered, and went home. And then later on in the century, we said we need to stop doing that. So we repealed that, and we let bars open longer. But that had already taught 2 generations of Kiwis that binge drinking was the way you drink. And so we have a really strong history of teaching our children and our grandchildren that drinking means binge drinking. And it means once you open, you should drink until you're drunk. And so it's a really, really hard culture shift that we have to try and manage at the moment to get people out of that sort of thinking.
If you're needing some glasses, that's cool. You can go into Specsavers because they've got highly qualified optometrists. Actually, I'm going to ring my mum, Mary Ellen, right now because my mum, without even knowing it, is the number one Specsavers influencer. She always gets her glasses from Specsavers, and she loves to tell me about every step of the journey.
Hello.
Hi, Mum. It's me. You're on my new podcast.
Oh, what's your new podcast?
Well, I'll fill you in about that later, but it's sponsored by Specsavers, and I was just saying that you're the number one Specsavers influencer because you always get your glasses from there. So could you just tell me what your favourite things about Specsavers?
Favourite things about Specsavers? Service. They look after you. They're brilliant. Good price.
Yeah.
I go in there and I feel like they're looking after me. And what's best for me. And the extra thing that was added last time, because as you know I'm old, they actually now added into the hearing test, which I thought eyes and ears was brilliant.
We'll listen to her.
Yeah, so yes, I am the number one fan. I haven't struck a Specsavers that I haven't been looked after.
Oh, Mum, thank you very much for the feedback. We will make sure it's passed on. You've now featured in the podcast. I'll let you get back to whatever radio station you're listening to, which most definitely isn't the one that I'm working on, and I'm offended.
No, that's the way it is. You've got to listen to others so you know how good you lot are.
Yes, way to keep us humble. All right, Mum, have a great day.
Okay, take care.
Bye. I told you, she's honestly the biggest Specsavers fan, and she always comes out and Dad tells her that her new glasses make her look very sophisticated. So if you want to be hot like my mum Mary Ellen, go and see the team at Specsavers. Back to Vic and Hamish from Sober Awkward, because a lot of people talk about the positives when you stop drinking. So I wanted to know what theirs were.
Well, I often get, you're very photogenic, and I'm saying, well, does that mean I look awful in real life? Like, does that mean every photo, okay, you're shocked, you're disappointed and shocked when you see me in real life because the photos of me are so nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we get always, I go for a walk every day where I live, and people obviously know what I do for a job, which is kind of this professional party pooper now. And I walk past on my daily 5K, and I walk past the bar and the pub down where I live, and I literally have people shouting out, all right, Vic, I'm only having one tonight. And I sit here, I'm shouting across the road, I'm not your conscience.
Yeah, exactly. But you do kind of become your drunk friend's conscience.
Totally, they
don't
want
you?
to explain to you why they're only having one tonight, and because everybody's interested in it.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's really changing, even in the time that I've done the podcast, is that people aren't giving you a really hard time if you say, I don't drink anymore. A few years ago, perhaps you'd get a bit of a nudge, go on, one won't hurt and all that stuff. But now, maybe it's just me, but I definitely find people aren't trying to twist your elbow as much.
So with all of that said, Vic and Hamish are giving us this really great social perspective, and there's so much more to come from Professor Andy Towers. But first, I wanted to go around and ask a bunch of people around my workplace who are ranging pretty much from their early 20s into their 40s to find out if they thought their life would be better if they didn't drink. And their answers really surprised me.
Probably worse.
Probably worse? Fair enough.
Worse.
In my current stage of life, definitely worse.
Why?
Because I'm young and I enjoy partying with my friends.
And you can't party without booze.
I don't think I have as much fun without booze.
I think I would be a lot more motivated if I didn't drink every weekend because I'd be able to get more personal things done, I think.
Do you think your life would be better, worse, or the same if you didn't drink alcohol?
I don't know. I reckon kind of the same, to be fair. Like, I don't
You are a very good drug fipsy, so it's quite easy for you.
I don't... Yeah, maybe the same.
What would your advice be to those people that hesitant because they're worried about how people will perceive it?
Listen to the podcast. Well, it can feel isolating, and it can feel scary to feel like you're the only person in your world who is sober. I knew 0 sober people when I went sober, other than Vic, who just did this podcast. So it can feel like, Vic describes it as like a bright light is shining on you, and you're very aware of what you're doing and saying, and you go to a social situation, you feel, what do I do with my hands? And I don't have that excuse of going to get a drink. So I think finding like a sober community, I thought sober people didn't exist. I was like, where are these people hiding away?
Weirdos.
So listening to something like the podcast, who go, okay, at least someone else is going through the same thing. We've got a sober social network called Cuppa. It's called the Cuppa.community online. And just sort of finding other sober people. They are out there. They're not all just living inside, white knuckling it. That certainly helps. But it's a challenge. Like, that is something that everyone that goes sober has to sort of deal with, amongst other questions they've got to ask themselves about why they overdrank in the first place.
Yeah.
It's hard.
And that's why the podcast is called Sober Awkward, because, of course, those first social interactions when you give up booze, you're not the same person anymore. You're not the party animal in there buying a round of shots. You come in as kind of this fragile soul, not really knowing what to do with yourself, which is incredibly awkward. There's kind of like this moment of silence where people don't know who you are anymore, and you don't know who you are anymore, because it was your entire identity probably being this kind of party animal.
But also I found it really interesting. I always thought, oh, that person's like so good at like holding their booze, blah, blah, blah. And now actually seeing what people were like when they're drunk, you're like, oh, actually, you are not good at holding it. But also your friend group changes because you realise that you spent a lot of time with people that were your drinking friends, like your friends that you just like get real hammered with, rather than your friends that don't care if you're sober.
I mean, some friendships do fall by the wayside, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Because you just don't see them as much. If someone's going to the pub every night and you're at home doing Scrabble, doing some meditation, you're not going to be on the same level, are you? So you do have to work out who your mates are a little bit when you get sober. And also a really good tip is to swap your days for nights, or nights for days is what I did early in my sobriety. I just made a choice to keep myself safe, was to get all my socialising. I'm a social person.
Yeah.
And I thought, I still want to do this. I still want to go out. And I decided to go out for breakfast with people. I did exercise group in the morning and had a coffee with people and went for a swim with them afterwards. And I got my fulfillment from that. And it meant by the evening I was kind of exhausted and wasn't bothered about going out. I didn't want to have kind of really loud conversations in bars anymore. It's not an interest for me. So I have to choose my venues really wisely now.
Yeah.
People often ask now, is it all right if I drink around you?
Yeah.
I'm always like, yeah, it's fine. I'm having an issue at the moment where I'm trying to make my house an alcohol-free zone.
That's good.
No, it's not, because I'm just rubbish at telling people because I'm too embarrassed. Because I don't want to stop their fun.
Oh, just send them a link of the podcast.
They'll know now. My house is alcohol-free. It's just my parents. I just think they're 80 and 86.
Yeah.
And it's just too late for me to try and start saying, well, you should slow down on your drinking. It's just not going to happen.
No.
But yeah, part of me just wants to go, is it okay not to drink around my house anymore? But I can't do it.
Do you get it when people now act like hangovers aren't as bad around you because they know you're sober? So we get people like seeing us on a Saturday morning, and I know that they're hungover, and they're like, I actually feel fine. I'm eating something funny yesterday.
I do, because they think I'm going to judge them.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just like, God,
Exactly.
I don't understand. Or it will launch into the, I'm so hungover, I need to stop drinking, like blah, blah, blah.
You're
and
back
then I'm
into
like,
that.
God.
Yeah.
I don't mind having this conversation with you if it's actually one that's going to last. But when it's one we're just having as lip service, like let's do ourselves both a favour and just get onto the
Good idea.
Well, it's awesome to have you guys here in New Zealand.
Thank you.
I am sure that everybody would have benefited so much from having you guys on the podcast as well. And I'm so glad that you were my first guest, and I'm honestly super, super grateful. Listening to Sober Awkward has been such an incredible help for me in actually succeeding and staying sober and having a smarter mindset about alcohol and things like that. So what you're doing is so powerful, and I hope that you keep doing it. But just as your last kind of exit to wrap up the interview, if I could get one pep talk each to somebody right now that wants to go sober, what is it?
It doesn't matter how big or small your problem is. You are worthy of picking up a phone or going to an AA meeting or doing whatever it takes to get better from this. As I said before, it's not about how much you drink. It's about whether alcohol is preoccupying your brain and whether you're struggling with it mentally. It's not comparing it to other people, and it's not saying, well, Jack down the pub drinks this and he's all right and he's the one that's an alcoholic, and pointing the finger. When I got sober, I had to take responsibility for my issue. It wasn't my environment, it wasn't my culture, it was my arm reaching out from my body to open a bottle of wine or to crack open a beer or wave $1 note at a barman to get a drink. It was always coming from me. And when I took responsibility and got therapy for my very normal drinking habit is when I completely changed my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so powerful. Completely changed my life.
Completely.
Right there. That is so on point from Vic. It's almost poetic, but I needed to ask Andy what his take was.
To make it really, really simple, a lot of people drink to cope with things. Like often you'll get home from a day at work and go, I'm just so stressed, I need a drink. And that's okay, as long as it doesn't become a habit, because then you start drinking because that is the thing that helps you unwind and de-stress. And if the stress goes up, the only solution you have in your back pocket is to drink more. And so one of the benefits of not drinking is actually finding out how you can cope with stress. And you can. You can cope with stress by a whole bunch of other things, by getting out, by talking to people, going for a run.
It's a weird one because I hear all of this and I will probably drink alcohol again one day. I mean, I drank when I went on a holiday in Japan for a week. I just haven't really made a solid decision on it yet. But hearing all of this, I really hope that it doesn't sound preachy when you listen to it, because that's absolutely not what I'm trying to do here. I'm not trying to make anybody stop drinking. Interestingly, though, Hamish from Sober Awkward is exactly the same. He says that he may not be sober forever, but for now, there is one massive positive, and this positive really stuck with me.
The most valuable asset that we have, in my opinion, is time. Time with our friends, time with our loved ones. And one of the most surprising aspects that I found of going sober was the amount of time that you get back in your life. We sort of forget the amount of time we think thinking about alcohol, drinking alcohol, or recovering from alcohol. It's a big chunk, particularly when you're on a holiday. That's when I realised, oh my God, I spend a lot of time doing this exercise. And I think now my days feel so much longer. My holidays feel so much longer. I'm finally spending time doing things I really want to do, and I make memories that I actually remember.
Thank you so much for joining us. And if you want to check out Sober Awkward for yourself, check out the show notes just below. We'll link to the podcast and the Hamish and Vic's social media. But thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Sharon. Thanks for having us on.
Wow, okay. The podcast really started off in a deep place. I didn't realise that we were going to be in the deep and meaningful corner like straight away, but here we are. On the next episode, I have Ozempic expert Johan Hari joining us.
These drugs are rocket fuel for eating disorders.
Wow.
There's always unpredictable effects, and we're already seeing that with these drugs. I think before this revolution hits New Zealand, and do not underestimate, you will know a lot of people on these drugs very soon. Really stop and think about what this is going to mean for all of us, because it's going to have huge implications.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time on Better Me. Hopefully. Love ya.